Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Trump presidential announcement that occurred yesterday at Mar-a-Lago and what the implications for that announcement will have on the 2024 presidential election. Now, as a side note, we're going to be covering the midterms tomorrow. I'll talk about what exactly happened, why the GOP underperformed, and why this ultimately puts the Republicans in a very weak position going into 2024. So that'll be tomorrow's video, so stay tuned for that. But today we're going to talk specifically about Trump's presidential ambitions and what this impact is going to have on the presidential race, because Joe Biden is very likely to run for re-election now, especially given what happened during the midterms. Democrats did very well. Biden can tout a lot of achievements because of that. And now we have essentially, if all continues, a matchup between Trump and Biden once again. So we're going to talk about the dynamics of that in just a second. But first, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. So Donald Trump waited only a week after the midterm elections to announce his presidential bid. That's obviously very early for a presidential contender. Even Elizabeth Warren, I think, didn't announce her presidential run until New Year's Eve of 2018. So at least she waited a couple of months. But Trump is getting in this race really as early as possible, even before the Georgia runoffs happen. And of course, I'll have a video on that later on in the week. But this is incredibly early. A lot of people have speculated this is because of a looming indictment by the Department of Justice. Trump is trying to get ahead of that so he can use this presidential bid as leverage against a possible indictment due to the whole classified documents thing. So I think Trump is trying to get ahead of this by announcing his run for president. But I think it's also a sign of weakness on Donald Trump's part. And what I mean by that is that he's trying to jump ahead of the presidential contest to try and clear out the primary field, because there's been a lot of speculation among a number of Republicans that wanted to get into this race. And I think a lot of them will still get into this race. And I'll talk about that in a different video when we talk about 2024 Republican presidential primary contenders, because I think you're going to see certain candidates, Nikki Haley, Larry Hogan, Ron DeSantis. I think you're going to see people like this jump into the race even with Donald Trump in the primary. And that's a very different dynamic than what we had back in 2020. Of course, during 2020, Trump was the incumbent president. He really didn't have any serious primary challengers. We didn't really have a real Republican primary. In fact, some GOPs even canceled their GOP primaries outright and just endorsed Donald Trump for a second term. This is a very different dynamic. Trump is no longer the incumbent president. He's been out of the White House for about 2 years. And I think because of that, you're going to see a much more competitive primary like we did back in 2016. I don't think you're going to have 20 some odd people jumping into this race, but Trump is actually going to have to fight for the nomination, something he didn't have to do back in 2020. Now, there's a number of reasons why Republicans would be looking for another option. Obviously, the fact that Trump lost in the 2020 election is a big reason. Of course, some Republicans blame Trump for the 2022 midterm debacle as well. His conduct, his policy, just there's plenty of reasons why you have Republicans coming out of the woodworks and looking for another candidate. Age is another big elephant in the room. I mean, Trump and Biden will both be nearing 80 or in their 80s by the 2024 election. And there's a lot of people, a majority of Americans, want different candidates besides Trump and Biden. So this is a very different dynamic than what we saw back in 2016 and even 2020. Now, if Trump does decide to run, again, he's going to have to face some competition. Mike Pence wants to jump in the race. I don't really think Mike Pence is a serious contender. Even if he does jump in, he's not going to pull very good. He's probably not even going to make it to Iowa. But there's going to be some other serious contenders. I think Ron DeSantis being the biggest one, because Ron DeSantis is popular with the same base of voters that Donald Trump is. And in the real world, outside of Twitter and these other echo chambers, the vast majority of Republicans both like Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump. And I think there's a very good possibility that Trump might not be the nominee in 24. 2 years ago, I probably would have told you that if Trump wanted the nomination, he would have it. Nobody would be able to challenge him. But especially given the midterm performance, a lot of Republicans, not just in the GOP establishment, but regular Republican voters are looking for other options. So if Trump wants to win the Republican nomination, he really needs to go back to his 2016 messaging in order to try to win these voters back, because there's a lot of disaffected Republicans that are tired of the drama, tired of just Trump's persona, and it's really kind of a MAGA hangover with some of these Republican voters. Now, let's say Trump is the nominee in 24. How would he fare against Joe Biden? We're not going to talk about 2022 in this video because, again, I want to spend a separate video tomorrow talking about the 2022 midterms. But Donald Trump is not looked at favorably by the majority of Americans. 39%, about 40% of Americans view Donald Trump favorably. Joe Biden has a similar unfavorable. Now, when you put those two together, I think Trump's favorability will change now that his announcement is official. Give it a couple weeks or so. It's either going to go up a little bit more or it's going to go down a little bit more, because we've seen a number of polls where Trump and Biden are very competitive in a lot of the swing states. And even leading up to the midterms, there were polls that had Trump ahead by 5 in Georgia, by like 12, 15 points in Iowa and Ohio. So you had a lot of those polls leading up to the midterms. But if there's one lesson that the midterms taught us, is that the polls really don't matter that much anymore, or at least aren't as accurate as we thought they would be, because certain factors weren't taken into account. I think one of the things about 2022 was that there was a significant polling miss among likely Democratic voters, likely voters that were going to vote Democratic, because I think the polls wanted to give the result a little bit of a Republican bias, because polls tended to be biased against Republicans in the past and ultimately undersampled Republicans. So I think this time around, the polls tried to overcompensate for Republican support, and that's why we got a very skewed result. It's one of the reasons why mine and many other people's predictions was way off in the midterms. But looking at 2024, I think this is certainly not the strongest option that Republicans could go with, just objectively speaking. I mean, Trump is viewed at very unfavorably. He's underwater by nearly 12 points. Joe Biden, on the other hand, is also not viewed favorably. But if the midterms taught us anything, it's that even if Joe Biden and the Democrats are unpopular, if the Republicans don't have a strong message to counter that and a popular figure to rally behind, they're going to lose. And that's one of the reasons why I think, as of right now, Joe Biden is still a favorite to win in 2024. Now, a lot could change. Obviously, it really depends on how Trump wants to run this campaign, how much of a competitive primary he ends up having. But I really think Biden is the favorite at this point in the general election. I mean, let's take a look back at 2016. And in some ways, 2016 was really a fluke election. It's not an election I look at that Donald Trump won. This is an election that Hillary Clinton lost. The 2016 election was a referendum on Hillary Clinton, and ultimately the voters rejected her. I mean, this was off the back of 8 years of George W. Bush, 8 years of Obama. Voters were tired of the status quo, and Donald Trump was the perfect candidate to sort of harness that energy, capture that lightning in a bottle, and win. And nobody really expected it. Again, a lot of outlets gave Trump less than 5% chance to actually win this election. There were only a couple of people that actually thought Donald Trump was going to win at the end of the day. But Trump really captured lightning in a bottle. I think that's something that he didn't have when we go over to 2020. Of course, you had COVID, you had mass civil unrest, you had a lot of things going on. And at this point, voters were looking for the status quo again. In 2016, voters were going against the status quo. They wanted a bomb thrower. They wanted somebody who was unpredictable, somebody who they thought would aggressively stand up for them. And in 2020, it was quite the opposite. People wanted to go back to the status quo after 4 years of Donald Trump, COVID, all the rest. And that's the main reason that Joe Biden won, is because independents and even a fraction of Republicans decided to take a chance on him, because it really wasn't so much that people liked Joe Biden. It was more so that they didn't like Donald Trump and they would go with the alternative. So 2016 was really sort of the change election, and 2020 was the status quo election. And 2022 was also a status quo election. And again, I'll talk about that in my midterm analysis. But going into 2024, it's really going to be a question to a lot of voters of if they want the status quo or if they want to go back to Donald Trump, which they rejected 4 years earlier. And that'll be what the presidential election is about, because it'll be Trump's record as president versus Biden's record as president. And Biden's record as president is a lot more fresh in the American people's minds than Trump's record as president. Again, American voters have very, very short memories. And obviously the swings in various cycles really indicate that. So I think Biden is the favorite going into 2024 still, especially given what we saw in the midterms. This red wave that was supposed to happen never really materialized. Well, it did, and we'll talk about that in the video. But my point is, Donald Trump is certainly not the strongest candidate that the Republicans could put up. And if he wants to win 2024, he has to go back to more of a 2016 messaging. He has to do more to appeal to the center because, his antics on Truth Social really have only been appealing to the hardest core supporters of Donald Trump's, the true core of MAGA. Everyone else, Republicans, Independents, Democrats, have sort of moved on in a sense. And Donald Trump's biggest battle is going to be making himself the face of the Republican Party again, because I think after Tuesday night, he's no longer the face of the Republican Party. He might still be the most galvanizing figure within the party, but Ron DeSantis really will give Donald Trump a run for his money, and it's really a question of if Trump can recapture that 2016 energy, use it against Joe Biden, and ultimately win at the end of the day. So as of right now, this isn't a prediction video, but I think Joe Biden is the favorite going into 2024. Again, Trump just announced there's a lot of things that could happen in the country. Some are speculating that next year, particularly, is going to be really bad economically. So obviously that's going to help the out party. It will give Trump some ammo to use against Joe Biden. But, this presidential run really indicates that, Trump wants to get in this early. He wants to clear the field. He's not feeling as confident as he did back in 2020. And ultimately, this is an attempt to try and galvanize the base behind him as early as possible against Joe Biden. We'll see ultimately if it ends up paying off. So anyway, that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed, please leave a thumbs up down below, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you don't miss any more videos I put out. And as always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.